Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from the local market. The prosecutor's voice was cold. The old man lowered his head, whispering, "I just needed strength to live one more day." The courtroom chuckled. Reporters smirked. To everyone, he was just another homeless thief in rags. But then, the judge read his name. His hands froze, his eyes filled with tears. And in a moment no one expected, the judge rose silently from his seat. And what happened next that turned a petty theft trial into a story the whole nation would never forget? Before I begin, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because stories like this prove that justice delayed can still be justice delivered. Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from the local market. The prosecutor's tone was sharp, almost dismissive, as though the man before him didn't deserve more than a sentence or two. The defendant, Walter Grady, age 66, bowed his head. His silver beard, unkempt and rough, brushed against the collar of his worn coat. His voice, quiet but steady, slipped through the murmurs of the courtroom. "I just needed strength to live one more day." The gallery chuckled. A few lawyers smirked. Someone in the back row even laughed out loud. To them, Walter was just another homeless man caught trying to get something for free. But the judge, Michael Carmichael, didn't laugh. His eyes were on the file in front of him, and with every line he read, his expression hardened. Who was this man? Why did the judge suddenly look like he'd seen a ghost? Walter Grady had been a fixture on Brooklyn streets for over a decade. Thin, weathered, and quiet, he carried a faded green military backpack wherever he went. Unlike others who panhandled or shouted at strangers, Walter kept to himself. He collected bottles for recycling, sometimes accepted a sandwich from a restaurant worker, and slept in different doorways to avoid becoming a nuisance to anyone's shop owner. People passed him every day, but no one really saw him. He was invisible, but Walter hadn't always been that way. For over 20 years, he had served in the U.S. Army. He had worn the uniform with pride through 3 dangerous tours overseas. He had once been useful, once been respected, until the day life stripped all of that away. In 2008, his wife Margaret died of cancer. The VA hospital had misdiagnosed her at first, and by the time the truth was clear, it was too late. Walter never forgave the system that failed her. He sold their small apartment, gave the money to her favorite charity, and walked away from the life he'd built. The decorated veteran became a ghost, choosing the streets over sympathy. "Sometimes it's easier to be nobody," he once told a soup kitchen volunteer, "than somebody who failed the person you loved most." 3 days without food brought Walter into Morelli's Corner Market on that cold November afternoon. Snow threatened outside, and his hands trembled as he slipped a day-old loaf of bread into his coat, but Mr. Morelli had just installed new mirrors. "Hey, stop right there!" the store owner shouted, already dialing the police. Walter didn't run. He stood still, the bread still visible in his jacket. "I just needed strength to live one more day," he said quietly, repeating the same words he would utter in court. 2 officers arrived. The younger one, Officer Jenkins, hesitated as he noticed the worn dog tags around Walter's neck. "You really a vet?" he asked. Walter only nodded. "I used to be someone useful," he said. "Not anymore." The next morning, Walter shuffled into the municipal courtroom in the same wrinkled clothes he'd been arrested in. No family waited for him. No lawyer stood at his side except a rushed public defender. The case seemed simple. A hungry old man stealing bread. The prosecutor smirked as he spoke. Given his prior incidents of petty theft and lack of address, the state recommends continued detention until trial. Judge Carmichael barely looked up. The gallery whispered among themselves, half bored, ready to move on. Just another homeless thief. Just another statistic. But when the clerk read the name aloud, Walter Edward Grady, former staff sergeant, United States Army, something shifted. The judge's hand, gripping the edge of the bench, trembled. His eyes flicked from the file to the man standing before him. The name echoed in his mind. He read it again, then again, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The courtroom laughed at Walter, but the judge was no longer laughing. His eyes filled with something no one expected. Tears. Why did this man's name hit him so hard? What had the judge remembered? The courtroom buzzed as people whispered, but Judge Carmichael abruptly stood. Judges never stood in routine hearings. Gas rippled across the room. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, he announced, his voice rough. He left quickly for his chambers, leaving the prosecutor, the defense, and the audience stunned. Walter sat in silence, head bowed as though nothing unusual had happened. What secret lay in Walter's past that could shake a judge to his core? If you think no one should ever judge a book by its cover, drop a comment saying "never judge," because Walter's cover was hiding a story the world had forgotten. The murmurs of the courtroom grew louder as the judge disappeared into his chambers. Reporters scribbled notes, lawyers exchanged puzzled glances, and the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. No one could explain why Judge Michael Carmichael, known for his icy demeanor, had suddenly stood up during what should have been a routine petty theft case. Walter sat motionless at the defense table, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had grown used to people making decisions about his life without asking for his voice. Another day, another judgment. But inside those chambers, the judge wasn't reading statutes or preparing sentencing notes. His trembling hands reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn photograph. A younger man stared back at him from the picture, dressed in desert fatigues, standing in front of a medical tent in Iraq. And behind him, a figure Carmichael could never forget, Walter Grady. 20 years earlier, Carmichael had been a terrified field medic in Fallujah. Their convoy had been ambushed. Bullets cracked overhead, trucks burned. Chaos swallowed the desert night. Amid the screaming, one man had refused to run for cover. Walter had climbed into a burning supply truck and driven it away from the wounded, saving 17 lives from certain death. Later that same night, Carmichael had taken shrapnel to the leg. Barely conscious, he had been carried for 2 miles through gunfire and smoke, carried by a man who whispered over and over, "Keep breathing, kid. Your story isn't over." That man was Walter Grady. The judge's throat tightened. He had spent years wondering what happened to the soldier who saved him. He had searched for Grady, but the trail had gone cold after Walter's discharge. Now here he was, standing in rags, accused of stealing bread. The judge's computer confirmed it. Service record after service record appeared on his screen. Bronze Star for valor, Purple Heart, photographs of Walter carrying an Afghan child to safety during a humanitarian mission. The courtroom had laughed at Walter, but the judge was remembering the night he owed his very life to him. Meanwhile, Walter sat in silence, hands folded on the table. His public defender scrolled through emails, barely paying him any attention. The bailiff scrolled his phone. To everyone in that room, Walter was invisible, but to the judge, Walter was unforgettable. When court resumed, the change was immediate. Judge Carmichael's voice carried a weight it hadn't before. "In light of new information regarding the defendant's background," he said slowly, "this court will postpone further proceedings pending a full investigation." The prosecutor frowned, flipping through his notes. "Your Honor, this is a simple theft case." "Simple?" The judge's voice cut like steel. "Nothing about this case is simple." Walter glanced up briefly, confusion flickering in his eyes. Why was the judge looking at him with something he hadn't seen in years? Respect. That evening, local news carried a short headline. "Homelessman claims military service. Judge delays sentencing." Comment sections lit up with cynicism. "Another faker using stolen valor." If he really served, why isn't he getting benefits? Should have just stayed in line like everyone else. Walter saw none of it. In the county holding cell, he sat quietly with his old dog tags wrapped around his hand. Another inmate sneered, shoving him against the wall. "Stolen valor is disgusting, old man. My brother died in Afghanistan, and people like you pretend to be heroes." Walter didn't fight back. He'd stopped fighting a long time ago. He just whispered to himself, "Almost there, Maggie." Just holding on a little longer, the next morning, Walter was escorted back to court. But this time, the room looked different. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Lawyers in sharp suits, reporters with notepads ready, and, most striking of all, 3 military officers in full-dress uniforms sat in the front row. Walter's confusion deepened when his overworked public defender was replaced by a gray-haired attorney who introduced himself as Richard Harlow from the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. "Someone's taken an interest in your case, Mr. Grady," he said. Then the doors opened. Colonel James Mason, once Walter's commanding officer, walked to the stand. "I am Colonel James Mason, currently stationed at Fort Hamilton. I have known Staff Sergeant Walter Grady since our deployment to Iraq in 2003, he began. The colonel's voice carried through the courtroom with the authority of a man who had seen both battlefields and funerals. He turned to Walter. "This man saved 17 lives during an ambush." He carried a wounded medic to safety under fire. Despite his own injuries, all eyes turned to the judge. His professional mask cracked, and he gave the faintest nod. Gasps swept through the room. The prosecutor stammered, "Your Honor, while his service is admirable, this doesn't change the fact that he stole bread." "Let me finish," Mason interrupted, pulling a folder from his case. "There was an administrative error in 2008. Due to a misfiled address, Mr. Grady's benefits and pension were terminated. He has been entitled to both medical care and over $246,000 in payments for 15 years. He wasn't just forgotten by society, he was failed by the system." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbled faster, and Walter, for the first time, looked up with wide eyes. He hadn't known. The judge cleared his throat. His voice was softer now, almost breaking. "Mr. Grady, please approach the bench." Walter rose slowly, chains rattling, his back bent not by age but by years of being unseen. "I didn't recognize you yesterday," Judge Carmichael said. "But you were the man who carried me out of Fallujah. You saved my life, and I'll be damned if I let this country fail you again." The courtroom erupted, some in gasps, some in applause. Walter simply bowed his head again, too overwhelmed to speak. "If you believe no hero should ever be forgotten, comment, 'Heroes live forever.' Because Walter's story proves that even when the world forgets, the truth finds its way back." The courtroom air felt charged, as if every person inside sensed history being made. Walter Grady, who had walked in wearing the same wrinkled clothes from his night in a holding cell, was no longer invisible. Every eye followed him as he stood at the bench, his weathered face lined with confusion, humility, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Judge Carmichael's voice trembled as he spoke. "Protocol would normally prevent me from presiding over a case involving someone I know. But yesterday I didn't recognize you. Today I do. You are the man who saved my life in Fallujah." The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, even tears. The bailiff banged his gavel, but no one could contain the energy in the room. For the first time in years, Walter wasn't just another homeless man. He was a name, a story, a symbol of sacrifice. Colonel Mason stepped closer to the stand, holding up a letter. "Your Honor, this is from General Richards." He credits Sergeant Grady with saving his son during that same ambush. Alongside this letter are affidavits from 5 of Walter's former unit members, all attesting to his courage and integrity. The man before you isn't a criminal. He is a decorated veteran who has been robbed by bureaucracy. The prosecutor swallowed hard. His earlier confidence had dissolved. "Your Honor, while these records are compelling, theft is still theft." Judge Carmichael cut him off with a stare so sharp it silenced the entire room. "Theft is wrong, yes, but what do you call it when the government steals 15 years of a man's pension, his benefits, and his dignity?" A heavy silence fell. No one dared answer. Walter's attorney, Richard Harlow, placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "Mr. Grady has survived without food, shelter, or care because he believed the system no longer had a place for him. But today we see the truth. He should never have been here as a defendant. He should be here as a hero." Walter shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to praise. His life had been lived in shadows, not under the light of recognition. Then slowly he spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. "I don't need medals. I don't need applause. I just wanted to survive one more day. That bread, it wasn't about stealing. It was about staying alive long enough to maybe find a reason to keep going." No one laughed this time. Reporters put down their pens, tears in their eyes. Even the prosecutor lowered his head. Judge Carmichael removed his glasses. His voice broke. Mr. Grady, this court owes you an apology, and so does this country. In light of these extraordinary circumstances and the overwhelming evidence of bureaucratic failure, the state's charges are dismissed with prejudice. You are free to go, the gavel struck. But it wasn't just the end of a case. It was the start of something bigger. Walter blinked, stunned. For the first time in years, the chains on his wrist were removed. The weight wasn't just from iron. It was from 15 years of being unseen. As he turned to leave, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A young woman hurried forward, her eyes brimming with tears. "Uncle Walter!" she cried. Walter froze. The voice was unfamiliar, but the name tugged at his memory. The woman clutched his hands. "I'm Rebecca, Margaret's niece. We've been looking for you since Aunt Maggie passed." At the mention of his late wife, Walter's shoulders trembled. Rebecca pulled him into an embrace. For the first time in years, he felt human warmth that wasn't forced upon him by handcuffs or cold stares. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Walter stepped into the sunlight. Colonel Mason and Judge Carmichael walked at his side. No longer anonymous, Walter had become a headline. From homeless thief to national hero. Forgotten veteran found in Brooklyn court. Bread thief saved judge's life in Iraq. The nation wanted his story. Within 48 hours, veterans organizations raised over $200,000 in donations to support Walter. The VA began reviewing cases of other veterans whose benefits had been wrongly terminated. Politicians in Washington cited Walter's case as proof of systemic failure. But Walter himself didn't care about speeches or politics. What mattered was simple. He was no longer alone. Weeks later, Walter stood in a new suit at a veterans recognition ceremony. His bronze star and purple heart gleamed on his chest. The judge sat in the audience, this time not as an authority, but as a man paying respect. Walter approached the podium. His words were brief, humble, but unforgettable. "I don't want anyone's pity. I don't want to be remembered as a man who stole bread. I want to be remembered as a soldier who did his duty and as a husband who loved his wife. If this story reminds you of anything, let it be this. Heroes walk among us every day, and they don't always wear uniforms anymore." The room rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Military personnel saluted. Civilians placed their hands over their hearts, and Walter, for the first time in years, stood tall. 6 months later, a plaque was placed outside the Brooklyn courthouse. It read, "Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten." Dedicated to Staff Sergeant Walter Grady, U.S. Army, hero, survivor. Beloved below, the inscription was a bronze relief of Walter carrying a wounded medic across the sands of Iraq. The medic's name, Michael Carmichael. The judge stood beside Walter at the unveiling, tears streaming freely. "You carried me then," he said softly. "Now it's my turn to make sure your story is carried forward." Walter smiled, the pain in his eyes finally softened by recognition. "No man left behind," he whispered. And this time, the whole country listened. If you believe justice delayed is still justice served, comment "never forget" below. And if Walter's story touched your heart, hit subscribe, because heroes like him remind us that the strongest battles are often fought in silence.